Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into a captivating, recently released Nigerian movie that has so much to offer. This isn't your typical film, it's packed with valuable lessons, especially about patience and determination. If you struggle with either, then this movie is for you. So stay tuned and listen closely as we unravel this amazing story. The story begins with Dubem, the housekeeper, who calls Kennedy for dinner. He replies that he'll join them in a few minutes. Dubem goes downstairs to inform her boss and his girlfriend, Betty. Betty, however, is impatient and wants to start eating right away, but her boyfriend prefers they wait as he values eating together as a family. Betty's irritation is evident, hinting at her dislike for Kennedy. Just as they're discussing, Kennedy enters and apologizes for the delay, explaining he was busy preparing for a presentation. As they eat, the two brothers begin discussing Ken's presentation, but Betty rudely interrupts them, cutting the conversation short. Later that day, Collins and Ken step outside with glasses of wine, chatting casually. Collins notices Dubem sweeping the compound and becomes displeased, as cleaning isn't part of Dubem's duties. He searches for the gatekeeper, who, according to Dubem, has left. Frustrated, Collins goes inside to find out what happened, where Betty informs him that she dismissed the gatekeeper, stating his services were no longer needed. Collins, unhappy with Dubem doing extra work, tries to reason with Betty, but she accuses him of liking Dubem, given the compliments he often gives her. Their argument escalates until Collins leaves the room. Outside, Ken jokes about Collins' taste in women, saying Betty is certainly something else. Collins playfully teases Ken about a girl's picture on his pendant, revealing that Ken is still in love with his childhood sweetheart, hoping to reunite with her someday. Collins suggests Ken get closer to Dubem, as she clearly likes him. However, Ken declines, explaining he wants a partner who is ambitious, kind, and as driven as he is, leaving his brother impressed. The scene shifts to Victoria's apartment, where she celebrates her promotion to managing director of the family business with her friend. It was challenging to convince her father, who had always managed the company, but she finally achieved it. The next morning, Dubem serves breakfast as Ken joins. His brother offers last-minute tips for Ken's presentation. Later that day, Ken meets his client in a restaurant, expecting someone else but meeting Victoria, the new managing director of Octeral Luxury. Victoria is immediately impressed by Ken's knowledge of her favorite designers and his designs, though she makes it clear she wants someone ambitious for her brand's future. She requests Ken to create new, unique designs to send her via email. That evening, Dubem is slicing cabbage for dinner when Betty walks in, questioning her choice since they're having Iba. Dubem explains that Ken prefers lighter meals at night, especially if he skipped lunch, but Betty dismisses her reasoning and orders her to refrigerate the cabbage. Betty then complains to Collins about Ken altering her meal plans. Collins tries explaining Ken's dietary preferences, but Betty refuses to listen, ending the argument when Collins leaves. Nawa, one might think. If Betty is already acting like this before marriage, who knows what's next? Collins later finds Ken in the living room and asks about the presentation. Ken says it went well, though he was surprised to meet Victoria instead of her father. As they chat, Ken excuses himself to work on new designs for Victoria. Late at night, while everyone is sleeping, Dubem is studying, showing she has big dreams beyond her role as a housekeeper. The following morning, she cheerfully informs Ken that breakfast is ready. Later, at Victoria's apartment, her ex-boyfriend Morris arrives unexpectedly. Furious, Victoria demands to know why he's there. Morris explains that her father sent him, attempting to explain himself after their relationship ended poorly. Despite her initial anger, Victoria's friend persuades her to listen. Eventually, Morris apologizes, claiming the rumors about him were false, blaming personal issues for his behavior, and promising to make amends. That same day, Victoria was going through the designs Ken sent her and was amazed by what she saw. She decided to invite him over to discuss her ideas with him. As Ken was about to leave, Dubem called out to tell him she had served his meal, but he replied that he would eat when he got back. Dubem smiled brightly even when he declined, hinting she might be deeply in love with Ken, though he hasn't noticed yet. Perhaps over time, he will notice Dubem, or even grow to like her back. At Victoria's apartment, she shared her ideas with Ken and asked him for suggestions. Ken proposed that she could incorporate her personal story or childhood memories into her marketing strategy. Victoria mentioned she couldn't recall much from her childhood, except a painful memory of a high school heartbreak. Ken was surprised to learn they had attended the same school and asked which class she was in. It turned out they were classmates. Ken then showed her a pendant he had kept since then, which held sentimental value. Victoria was surprised he had kept it all this time, and Ken was thrilled to have found the girl he had been looking for. That evening, Ken returned home excitedly and shared the encounter with his brother, Collins. Collins was cautious, reminding Ken that Victoria has a boyfriend. However, Ken remained optimistic, pointing out that a boyfriend isn't a husband, so he still had a chance. Collins felt happy but helpless at his brother's confidence. The next day, Ken was working on his designs in the backyard with great focus and passion. The following day, Ken excitedly went to Victoria's house to show her his new designs. Unfortunately, her boyfriend Maurice stopped him from entering, telling Ken to wait for her call or reach out later as she was still asleep. Disappointed, Ken returned home looking downcast. As he headed upstairs, BOAMEH offered to serve him food. He agreed, and as they sat, BOAMEH complimented the designs she had seen in his room, calling them excellent and breathtaking. She asked if she could watch him sketch sometime, but he declined, saying he preferred to sketch alone. Just then, Collins's girlfriend, Betty, came downstairs, interrupting the moment and calling BOAMEH to the kitchen, prompting her to leave hastily. Over the next few days, Ken made repeated attempts to see Victoria, but he couldn't reach her. Frustrated, he returned home where Collins noticed his distress. Ken admitted he wanted to connect with Victoria, his ambitious favorite friend from school, but her boyfriend was keeping him from seeing her. Collins, amused, advised him to slow down, make sure Victoria was truly the one, and avoid getting emotionally drained. Ken thanked him and headed back upstairs. The next day, while jogging, Ken spotted Victoria jogging as well. They exchanged greetings, and Victoria apologized for being unavailable when he visited, explaining she was busy. Ken smiled and suggested they meet over the weekend to talk about his design ideas. Just then, a car drove recklessly by, startling Ken. It was Maurice, who insisted Victoria get in so he could take her home, leaving Ken feeling disappointed. The following day, Ken went to Victoria's apartment, but she told him she was heading to the office. He offered to go with her, but Maurice was already taking her. Though Ken wasn't pleased, he played along. Before she left, he shared a unique idea for her luxury jewelry launch, impressing her. When Ken arrived home, he rushed upstairs. Collins noticed and, sensing urgency, called him back. Ken asked if he could borrow Collins's car, saying it was urgent. Collins, surprised since Ken had never asked to borrow his car before, sensed it was important and happily handed over the keys. Betty, who was ready for work, came downstairs only to find Collins had lent Ken the car. Upset but with no other option, she reluctantly accepted Collins's arrangement for a ride, though she clearly dislikes Ken staying with them for reasons unknown. It turned out Ken borrowed the car specifically to prevent Maurice from taking Victoria to work. He reached her in time, and luckily for him, Maurice had a flat tire, forcing Victoria to call a ride. Ken, excited, paid the driver and offered to take Victoria to the office himself, which she happily accepted, leaving him feeling fulfilled. Later that day, Victoria and her best friend were at her dining room having lunch. Her friend asked if she was worried Maurice saw Ken driving her to work and back. Victoria calmly replied that she wasn't concerned, as Maurice was the one claiming to want to make their relationship work. Amused, she added, "Let the best man win," leaving her friend surprised as they continued their meal. Days later, Maurice, already feeling threatened by Ken's presence in Victoria's life, confronted her, insisting she tell Ken to stay away, as he felt uncomfortable with the situation. However, Victoria firmly responded that she couldn't ask Ken to keep his distance. Besides being their jewelry designer, she and Ken shared a history, having been friends since high school. Unable to accept that he was gradually losing his girlfriend, Maurice warned that if he saw them together again, he would walk away from the relationship. Unfazed, Victoria decided to call his bluff, as she didn't respond well to threats. Hearing that Ken would be visiting later to discuss the designs, Maurice angrily told her that she was the one ending their relationship, not him, and left, leaving her heartbroken and distressed. Later that day, in Victoria's bedroom, she confided in her friend that she was beginning to have feelings for Ken. Her friend reminded her that fame and wealth were in her near future, and Ken hadn't reached that level yet. Maurice, with his family's wealth, was already familiar with fame and luxury. She suggested that if Victoria truly wanted Ken, she should encourage him to elevate himself to match her standards, leaving Victoria surprised as she hadn't considered this. A few hours later, Victoria met with Ken in her living room to discuss the designs. Curious, she asked if he had any other income source besides his jewelry designing and sketching. Disappointingly, he said no. She then suggested he explore higher-paying, prestigious jobs in addition to his design work. Ken, astonished, reminded her of how she once said in high school that she would surpass her father's success. Victoria was surprised, as she didn't recall saying that, but they reminisced about other shared memories from school, laughing together. That night, Ken returned home and joined Collins for dinner. Collins asked how things were going with Victoria, and if he'd confirmed she was indeed the girl he'd been searching for. Ken replied that everything seemed to line up, and they had even planned a dinner date, leaving Collins impressed and happy for him. Ken then asked Collins for advice on how to earn more money. To his surprise, Collins encouraged him to focus on his designs and master his craft, assuring him that with enough skill, brands from all over would seek him out for business ideas, inspiring Ken with renewed confidence. Later that night, on their dinner date, Victoria suggested Ken consider a position at her father's company, promising it would help him financially. Shocked, Ken mentioned his goal was to build his own brand through his designs. Victoria suggested he do it as a side project, adding that it wouldn't provide him enough financial stability on its own. Surprised, Ken realized she wanted him at a certain financial level and that her offer came from a place of pride, leaving him confused. The next day, Collins asked Ken how the date went. Ken admitted he felt something was missing, as she didn't remember many of the things he did. Collins advised patience, suggesting he get to know her better, as they were no longer the kids they once were. Reflecting, Ken thanked him and agreed to keep an open mind. One morning after jogging, Ken and Victoria sat by the roadside talking. Curious, Ken asked about her father's journey from being an engineer to a businessman. Shocked, Victoria clarified that her father had never been an engineer, leaving Ken confused. She quickly urged him to wrap up the conversation. Back home, Ken was about to go upstairs when BOAMEH stopped him, warmly praising his sketches and sharing how much they inspired her. Amused, he thanked her for her encouragement, but hinted he couldn't get closer to her due to personal reasons, though he deeply appreciated her. BOAMEH smiled as he walked away. Days later, during breakfast, Ken voiced concerns to Collins about Victoria's push for him to elevate his finances by working for her father. He confided that something Victoria said about her father didn't align with his memory. Unbeknownst to them, BOAMEH overheard their conversation, shocked by Ken's story and the memories he shared about Victoria. She silently listened, realizing that Victoria couldn't affirm any of these memories. When Collins asked if he felt a connection with Victoria, Ken admitted he wasn't sure if it was a genuine connection or simply old emotions he was holding on to. Collins urged him to be patient. Later that day, while Ken was in his room, BOAMEH entered, visibly emotional, and began recalling the memories Ken had shared. She told him how she had left school in the middle of JSS 3, confirming they were in the same class. She reminisced about visiting Mr. Joe's garden for egg rolls and ice cream, and how she stayed by his side when he suffered a skin condition that caused others to shun him. She revealed that her father had indeed been an engineer, leaving Ken astonished. She couldn't hold back her emotions and ran out of the room. Outside, BOAMEH sat by the pool, looking downcast. Ken joined her, sitting close. Gently, he asked her what was wrong, and she began to explain. She told him she had stopped going by the name Victoria after her father's death, choosing the name BOAMEH to honor his memory and move forward. Ken, heartbroken, showed her the pendant, and she recognized it, recalling the day he took her picture with it. Overwhelmed and happy, Ken's phone suddenly rang, prompting him to excuse himself and take the call. Later, Ken visited Victoria at her apartment, where she excitedly shared that she had secured a position for him in her father's company, while he could still work on her jewelry launch. To her surprise, Ken told her that he didn't want to chase money, but preferred to focus on his dream of making an impact in the world. Surprised by his response, she asked if he wanted to be with her. He replied that he wasn't sure, explaining that if being with her meant sacrificing his dreams to focus solely on wealth, he couldn't do it. Confused, Victoria asked him to go home and think over his decision before they discussed it further, leaving Ken feeling overwhelmed. Back home, Ken excitedly shared the news with Collins. The real Victoria was actually BOAMEH, their housekeeper, as they shared memories that confirmed it beyond any doubt. Collins was happy for him and asked what his plans were with Victoria, his business client. Ken admitted he was unsure but would figure it out. Later that day, Ken joined BOAMEH in the kitchen where they talked about her father and her dreams. BOAMEH explained that her father had been very wealthy, but after his death, they had no money left, which was why she dropped out of school. She added that she believed she would one day be even more successful than her father. When Ken asked if she had other income sources besides housekeeping, she proudly told him she had written 5 books available on Amazon. Ken was impressed and happy for her, and they laughed as they continued chatting. The next day, Ken visited Victoria and requested a talk. He explained politely that he loved his work as a designer and aspired to gain recognition worldwide, choosing not to pursue money over his true passion. Disappointed, Victoria watched him leave. Just then, her friend came in and asked how the meeting had gone. Victoria confidently said that Ken didn't recognize the opportunity she was offering him and his stupidity was preventing him from seeing it. She decided to let him go, but if he returned to apologize, she would consider it. A friend suggested she go back to Maurice, leaving Victoria feeling perplexed and disappointed at her friend's low opinion of her. Days later, Ken and BOAMEH grew even closer, working and laughing together. One day, Betty walked in and, seeing them so close, angrily stormed off to confront her boyfriend, Collins, in their room. To her dismay, Collins was happy for Ken and BOAMEH, which left her feeling disappointed and led to an argument. Betty's habit of looking down on people didn't sit well with Collins, who called her out on it. Meanwhile, Ken and BOAMEH's bond continued to grow stronger. They cleaned together, shared laughter, and found deep fulfillment in each other's company. BOAMEH finally got the opportunity to watch Ken as he worked on his designs, wrapping her arms around him while he sketched. They discussed their dreams for the future, delighted at the prospect of building a bigger life together. Unfortunately, the arguments between Collins and Betty didn't end, and she eventually packed her bags, threatening to leave so that he could have his space. As she stormed out, Ken and BOAMEH emerged from Ken's room, seeing her leave with her bags, followed closely by an exhausted-looking Collins. Ken apologized, feeling he had caused the breakup. Collins replied that a girlfriend who couldn't get along with his only brother wasn't the one for him, adding that she'd never brought him peace since moving in. Collins left, leaving Ken feeling concerned. A few weeks later, Collins, Ken, and BOAMEH sat together, enjoying a meal. The girl Ken had once dreamed of finding had been right there beside him all along, though he'd been too distracted to realize it. Fate had brought them together, and since then, his heart had known only joy. This story teaches us the importance of kindness, patience, and staying true to oneself, for we never know how the future will unfold. So, what lessons did you take from this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more engaging and up-to-date